Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Play Therapy Circle. I'm Kylie Ellison, a therapist, clinical supervisor, and play therapy trainer, and I'm so grateful you're here. This podcast is a space for thoughtful, soulful conversations about child-centered therapy, play-based work, and what it means to show up with presence and compassion, both for our clients and for ourselves. Whether you're a seasoned play therapist, a student just starting out, or someone deeply passionate about working with children, you belong here. Hey everyone, welcome to the Play Therapy Circle podcast. I'm your host, Kylie Ellison, and I am so glad you are here. Welcome to part 2 of our episodes on parent consultations. We covered in part 1 going through intakes and what that initial consultation looks like. So we're going to finish that in part 2, and we're going to talk about how to do those ongoing parent-carer consultations as well. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. I hope it adds to your toolkit, and thanks so much for supporting us. Here we go. For our ongoing parent consult updates, we very much are again having this particularly structured so that it is in 3 sections. So the first section is very much around every 4 to 6 weeks we're meeting with the parent and we're checking in with them. So we dedicate very much so deliberately and consciously time at the beginning for the parent or caregiver to tell us how things are going with their child in various settings. So whether it's in the school setting, whether it's at home, whether it's with their peers, whether it's with extended family, whatever that looks like in terms of their struggles or their challenges, how is that going? Is it, has it deteriorated? Is it getting better? Is it the same? So I have a lot of scaling questions. I have a lot of prompting questions in my ongoing parent consult template that is good for me to have to be able to prompt me if I have a parent that has no update for me, because there is definitely lots of areas that I want to check in about, confirm about. So how are they finding play therapy? How do they find their child coming to sessions? What have they noticed at home? How are they coping at the moment? Has things gotten better or worse? A review of the goals that we set, 4 to 6 weeks ago. I like to do that every parent consult update to ascertain, are we still on the same track or do we need to adjust our goals? So there's lots of that contribution in the beginning of a review. So once I have done that initial check-in, I'm providing my feedback around how play therapy is going. So I think one of the most important parts, and again, this will be a separate podcast, guys, because I think that there is some really good information I'd like to share around how to caveat and communicate to parents those themes and stages of play, which is the 2 areas that I'm giving feedback in my ongoing parent consults. But really recognizing that when we are giving that feedback, we are aiming to protect the confidentiality of the child whilst also acknowledging that the parent generally is the one that has provided consent and is the one that referred and initially engaged with us. So we have that dual relationship of working with the parent and working with the child. So it's not an easy relationship to kind of navigate between parent and child and myself as the therapist. So I want to acknowledge and show a lot of empathy in that space to the parent, that they are really keen to know what's happening in the playroom. But I'm very conscious, guys, of making sure that I'm not talking about the specifics of what's happening in the playroom. That's really important for a couple of different reasons. We know that generally speaking, parents have not had training in child-centered play therapy. So when I'm talking about things in the playroom, and especially particular sequences of play, or exactly what the child has done in terms of how they played in the doll's house or how they played in the sand tray, that oftentimes is received by parents where they'll say things like, that just sounds like play, like that just sounds normal. And so we acknowledge that because they haven't had the same training as us oftentimes. And so that's fair that they are making that reflection back to us. So we need to be conscious of the fact that they have not had training in child-centered play therapy. And so we need to make the language easy and digestible for parents so they can understand what we are talking about. So what do I mean by that? if, say, you've got a child who is talking about a theme in play therapy in their sessions related to the topic or the theme of power and control. This is just one example. So I might mention that to the parents. I might not. It would depend on how that relationship is and the understanding kind of level of the parents. But I might say to them, what I'm seeing in the playroom and what's really important here is to talk about some of those issues that the child is discussing in therapy. And I'm using the word discussing because I think it's really important that we're educating stakeholders, including parents and caregivers, around the fact that children play, but that is their mode of communication. That's how they talk, is through play. So I'm using the word discussed because they are discussing. They're discussing through their play what they are doing. So what is being discussed is the issue of power and control. What does that mean for you? And, what does that mean in real terms? Oftentimes, we relate that to children feeling like things are out of their control, that they have no say or decision making over. And so when I start to use that language, it moves away from those clinical terms and helps me to be able to connect with the parent to start that conversation around power and control outside of play therapy. So I might say something like, what that can mean is that the child feels like they're not able to make choices for themselves. They don't have autonomy. They feel like others are making decisions for them, or they feel like things are happening to them that are not what they would want to have happen. So I'm then saying to the parent, can you help me? Because I really want to collaborate with them. I don't want this to be a situation where I'm the expert and I'm imparting the knowledge. This is a collaborative, walking alongside process. So I'm connecting with the parent to say, I'd really love your help. I wonder if you can help me to get a better sense of outside of play therapy, if you've noticed that at home, or if that's been something the school's noticed, or if you've noticed that with your child, with their peers. Help me to understand where that might be placed. And so by opening that conversation and giving that invitation for connection, I'm making sure deliberately that the parent is part of the change process. It's not just me. So I'm working systemically. So that is just one. I will often talk about learned helplessness. That's another one. And especially for our 4 to 6 year old age group, that's another term, clinical term, that I try to adapt to make sure that it's digestible for parents. So I might say something like, what I'm seeing in the playroom is, and I might use the term learned helplessness, or I might say, what I'm seeing is that your child is really struggling to do things for themselves. So what this looks like is that even really kind of simple tasks that I know developmentally they can do, they're often deferring to me as the therapist in the playroom to do, and really struggling to initiate play themselves or make decisions for themselves. Is that something you've seen at home? And when I open that invitation like that, 99.9% of the time, the parents are like, yep, let me tell you a story. And so that's fantastic. I want that connection. I want that not validation, that's the wrong word, but I guess alignment between what I'm seeing in the playroom and what might be happening outside. And generally speaking, 99% of the time, it's correct anyway. But that then gives me a great launch pad to talk about then the action plan, which is kind of our third section in those ongoing parent consults, of where to from here, and offering a strategy for parents. So if that is something that they are seeing, and it may have been part of the initial consultation, it may not have been, then I am launch padding to say, so I've got this really great way that I'd love to offer as a suggestion. And look, this is just something for you guys to try. And you can let me know next time we catch up if it's worked or if it hasn't worked. I want to talk a little bit about returning responsibility. So what I'm doing and what has really been a part of my practice in the last couple of years, and I just want to say this for anyone listening who is beginning in their journey, who is feeling deeply overwhelmed, who is feeling that imposter syndrome, feeling like you need to have a suite of psychoeducation handouts and resources for parents every session that you meet with a parent. Please take the pressure off yourselves. take the pressure off, because what I have learned in my journey is it's actually everything goes back to the work that we do in the playroom. I hope that that has weaved into our conversation today and been obvious, but it is obvious again when we're talking about strategies for parents. We know that parents are more stressed and anxious than ever before. If we think about it from that framework, if they are in fight or flight themselves, if they're hyper aroused too, if they're very anxious, highly strung, you are not going to be able to sit with them and go through a psychoeducation handout and give them a bunch of strategies. They are going to forget it before they unlock their car to get into their car to go home. Truly. They've probably forgotten it by the time they've walked to the car park. So I think it's about what is useful and helpful for the parent and caregiver and the family. And it truly is going back to basics. If we think about the population that we are serving right now and put that COVID lens on it a little bit, we have families that are overscheduled. We have parents that are often dual occupation, so both parents working, who have very limited time themselves. They're probably spending their weekends running around, doing extracurricular activities with their kids, seeing family, spending time with their own kids, whatever that looks like, right? So if we try to then give them homework and try to get them to fit that in as well, we have to be realistic about what we're giving them. So it's important, like we do in the playroom, when we know that the child is the expert in their therapy journey, so is the parents. So I know for any of my listeners who really like lots of structure, lots of kind of outcomes-based work, who might really enjoy knowing how things flow in terms of that trajectory, the bad news is that sometimes it's actually a bit of a journey. And so nothing necessarily follows that linear line, because that doesn't happen in the playroom either. So we acknowledge that if we can start at basics and even just as simple as reflecting feelings, I think that for anyone who has done training in child-centered play therapy, who have these skills in their toolkit already, lean into what you know. You would be surprised at the number of parents who don't know about the skill of reflecting feelings, or even more so, what's probably been interesting for me, and I guess for those of you out there listening would be cool to know too, the amount of parents who aren't at the moment dedicating very specific time to just connect with their child. So we know in filial therapy, we talk about those 30-second bursts of attention as beginning homework in the CPRT model. And the amount of parents where I've suggested that, where that's their homework. And I know that for many who feel the need to give lots more information, you can certainly still do that. And I often will give psychoeducation around attachment theory and trauma theory and all of those good things to help scaffold that skill that I'm providing. But ultimately, the work that we do in the playroom is relationship based. And so is that work with the parent, but then also the parent's work with the child. It all comes back to attachment, you guys. So if we can build some of those skills to help them with that connection, which will then lean into so many different aspects of support for the child, including co-regulation, emotional intelligence, all of those things that we know in child-centered play therapy, I want to impart that knowledge onto the parents, because we know, Gary Landreth says, why would we keep it, those skills within the playroom? It's there for us to share. And I that is not a direct quote, that is my summary. So I'm making sure that I'm giving suggestions in those parent consult updates that is going to be achievable. So sometimes people will use those SMART goals, things like that. If you want to use those SMART strategies, that's great, but making it realistic, as I said. So that is in very quick summary, because we are almost at an hour, you guys. We're like 48 minutes in, which is crazy. And I have still more to cover. So if you are still here, amazing. Thank you. I am fidgeting around here. You can probably see it for those of you on the YouTube, just trying to get comfy, because like sitting for this long is crazy for me. So thank you for sticking around and watching me while I fidget. What I want to finish today's episode is a couple of different considerations for practice. And I mentioned this at the start. What are some of the challenges that we have? Going back to my first topic here around the initial consultation. What are some of the common challenges that we face when we meet and connect with parents? Especially, so there's a couple of different triangulations here. We can have the triangulation of separated parents and us as the therapist, or we can have the parent-child and us as the therapist. So when that triangulation or allegiance splits occurs, so we need to be really mindful of that. And my tip, I guess, in terms of navigating that is certainly making sure we have transparency around the information that we are providing to update all parties involved, and ensuring that we are protecting confidentiality, but really sticking to our framework of themes and stages of play. Oh, I realized I didn't actually talk about stages either. When we are providing those updates in terms of stages, we are looking at that across the 4 stages of play. So I definitely need to do another episode, you guys. I have bounced a lot today, and I had a really great plan, you guys, but like parent consultations, it's a journey. It's a journey. So I'm definitely keen for your feedback. If you want me to pull these topics apart even more, we can do so. But triangulation in terms of challenges, very difficult. High conflict co-parenting, so parents with conflicting expectations, or potentially going through, in Australia, we would call it the family law court. And so we are making sure that we are providing the same consistent information on the progress and goals to both parties. So it is obviously client dependent, but I do find that sometimes I am providing information as a summary via email to both parties at the end of, if I've met with them separately or if I'm meeting them together. I'm going to provide a summary of everything I've spoken about to make sure that the message is the same across both parties. So either, yes, having those consultations together or separately can be certainly an option. So school and potentially other stakeholder pressure for details, that's something that we experience as a challenge for sure. And so making sure that we are, again, sticking to our format and our framework around themes and stages of play. But I think there's also an opportunity for us to connect with those stakeholders, especially schools. I've certainly done, even just recently, school observations and stakeholder meetings to help support one of my kiddos in his school community. And I really enjoy it because, again, it offers that opportunity for connection where if we get the opportunity to do face-to-face, even better. Because we can then start to form those relationships where we can work in partnership with them too, obviously recognizing the confidentiality of the child and making sure we have consent to release information before we work with those stakeholders, of course, too. So what are we looking at in terms of any other challenges? Certainly cultural expectations can be a part of it. So explaining our process and how we work is really important. Scope creep in consultations. This is a great one. So where we may have a situation where we have a parent consult update and we start to recognize fairly quickly that this is becoming a therapy session for the parent. And for all of you listening, those beginning and those in the trenches who have been doing this for a while, you know what I'm talking about. This happens, and that's okay. That's okay. This is part of the journey and part of the process of helping to put those boundaries in for ourselves. So showing how grateful we are that they have connected with us and are giving those updates to us, but acknowledging your role and what you are able to provide in terms of supports and what that might look like in terms of other supports instead. So suggestions for counselling for themselves. And that is not something that's easy to broach. So I know everyone's different in when they want to do that. I guess 10 years down the line as a CCPT practitioner, 20 years in the industry, I feel like it's probably something I'm comfortable with tackling fairly early, because I want to make sure that in that parallel process of what I'm doing in the playroom, that the parent or caregiver can get that support as well. But it might be something that you don't necessarily broach straight away, but is something that comes up in follow-up parent consults. So definitely acknowledging what's within your scope and what's outside. Super, super helpful. What are some of the pitfalls, especially for beginning play therapists, that we might fall into when we do these initial consults or consult updates? So oversharing of the play content. This is a big one. And again, I've used this reference before, but in times of stress, we revert back to what we know. And so it may be a situation where you have the best of intentions of what you want to discuss. And then when you meet with the parent, especially for those parent consult updates, you might feel that pressure to provide lots of information. And you might be feeling that pressure of expectations of moving things along, getting those goals achieved, especially if they're a private paying client. So I just want to normalize for any of you who are having those experiences, because that is all part of it. That's all part of navigating as we build our skills. I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, really making sure you have a plan before you get started. So writing up your notes and having all of that information of what you'd like to share before you get started is really helpful. But also then making sure that in that session, we stick to our themes, we stick to our stages of play, and we stick to our goals, because that's really important. If you really struggle and you've had a difficult initial consultation, circling back to your clinical supervisor to get some tips and advice is certainly another way to access that support. Vague progress updates is another pitfall, right? So again, using scaling, using measurable indicators, using behavioral examples, like I talked about earlier in terms of talking about, say, the topic of learned helplessness. I'm not just talking about learned helplessness. What I'm doing is very much acknowledging that that behavior looks like struggling to do things for themselves. So I have a definition of each of those themes that are relatable for parents. So if you don't have that already, I would encourage you to do that. And again, that's something you might want to chat to your clinical supervisor about, to have some of that language in your toolkit, because I find that the easier we can navigate this in terms of tying that information together for a parent so they understand, the easier that progress is going to be for that child. So a lack of a plan, of a clear plan. So we were just talking about that before in terms of what are achievable strategies or psychoeducation for parents. That's why, again, every parent consult update, I'm reviewing the goals to make sure we're on the right path here, we're on track, are we on the same page? And oftentimes, what the parent has suggested in that initial consultation in terms of those goals, and then what the child actually shows us in play therapy, are two very different things. So it does, again, give us a framework and a launch pad to say, I know these things were on your list. I'd love to share with you from the work I'm doing what some of those other goals might be. So definitely keeping to that plan and reviewing that plan regularly. Boundary slipping under pressure. This is another one, you guys. Definitely is something for beginning play therapists to be aware of. I'm really mindful of the fact that in child-centered play therapy, it's about supporting children, it's about helping them to achieve their goals, and for them to be able to exit therapy. So I think for anyone listening who has had an experience or experiences, because this is a learning journey for us as much as it is for the child and the parent, where we've had situations where, say, parents have become, I guess, somewhat dependent on our intervention as part of their way of coping, and I guess as a family functioning. I always think that, and what we know from the literature on child-centered play therapy is when we meet the child in the very first session, that it is so important that we take the time in that first session to picture what that last session is going to look like. And that doesn't always stay the way that it does. But in our child-centered play therapy framework, we are always acknowledging that there will be an ending. There will be that reaching to mastery and exit from our service. And so what do I anticipate that will look like at the end of that journey? So we need to acknowledge that sometimes parents and caregivers are just having a really tough time and they're really struggling. But we may find in the playroom that the child has kind of reached as much as what they can do at this point in their journey. It might be that in a year, 2 years' time, it might be helpful for them to come back to therapy, and we certainly encourage and leave the door open, absolutely, for families to come back. But where they're at this developmental stage, at this point in their life, that they have achieved as much as they can, and it's then around establishing those boundaries with the parent or caregiver of what the next steps might be for that child in terms of therapy work. So there can be that dependence and I guess that boundary slippage under pressure. So have a script, have your agenda and established guide of what you're going to cover, and certainly some language around that empathy and unconditional positive regard for parents as well. So making sure that we also from the get-go, from the beginning, are very clear in our explanations of consent and confidentiality and the limits of confidentiality. We absolutely are covering that in the initial consultation, in that paperwork that we've given to the parent. So I didn't go into that in too much detail. So if that's something you guys would like me to cover more, definitely can do so. But making sure that they understand that if I am worried about them, about the child, and need to report, I have that obligation to do so. So being really upfront with them from the beginning. So we are reinforcing those boundaries early. So that leads me into those ethical considerations. And the first one is around consent and confidentiality. So making sure that it is really clear around the limits and what we will be sharing in terms of information. The child's right to privacy is very important. So we respect the therapeutic space and being transparent with them as well, to be able to connect with them and give them updates, but also to give that safe space for kids. So child's right to privacy, mandatory reporting and duty of care, I just mentioned too. So following our legal requirements in regards to reporting where required is super important to cover in that initial consult. And then making sure our record keeping and our data are definitely kept up to date, that we are putting together our factual notes and we're storing them securely, and establishing those really clear boundaries with parents and caregivers from the beginning, and expectations of what they can expect out of the play therapy experience. So that is, in just a nutshell, initial consultations and parent consult updates. And like I said, I didn't even go into the stages of play so much. So we've covered a lot of information. We've covered how to do that initial intake, what could be considered part of your framework for those parent consult updates, the challenges we experience, the pitfalls we experience, and those ethical considerations at the end. So I feel like there has been so much that we have dived into that there will be more episodes, you guys. But please, please, please let us know if you have any ideas of episodes that you would like to hear, how you're finding our podcast. This is our very first one being recorded. So did you like it? Has this been helpful? I hope so. I love getting on here and just sharing about child-centered play therapy, connecting with all of you, spreading the word about child-centered play therapy, and just really getting to connect with what certainly makes my heart happy. So I hope that this has been helpful for you too. So where to from here? I think next episode probably needs to be unpacking this further. So I will get my thinking hat on and decide on what the topic out of all of this information we've covered today will be next week. So please, if you have feedback on what you'd like to hear, we now have an email too. You guys, it's like a week of firsts. We have that in the playroom. We're always noticing change by firsts in the play therapy space. And here it is in our podcast. So we've got our beautiful studio now and we have an email. So hello@playtherapycircle.com. Please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. Please give us a follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We would Love to hear from you as well. And we are also on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. So you can check us out at the Play Therapy Circle podcast. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you to everyone who has connected with us and continues to support us. We absolutely love sharing this with you. And I can't wait to connect with you again next week. So go well, be kind to yourselves and each other. And I'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Play Therapy Circle. If anything resonated with you today, I'd love it if you could follow the podcast, share it with a colleague, or leave a short review. It really helps others find our circle. And if you have a topic or question you'd love me to explore, I'd love to hear from you. This space is for you, and I want it to feel like a conversation. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, you belong here.